Hello and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers. My name is Em, and in this podcast, I read true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, skepticism, or gore, only 100% true spooky tales. A few months ago, I worked on a bonus episode for the Patreon that revolved around people's paranormal experiences on Navajo reservations. This led me down a research rabbit hole on tricksters, spirits and entities that appear throughout history. Before the word demon became synonymous with evil, the ancient world described something a little bit more complicated. In ancient Greece, the word daemon didn't mean devil, it meant spirit. Daemons were watchers of mankind. They weren't purely evil or purely good, but they were powerful. Across cultures, the trickster spirit appears in different forms, not necessarily to harm, but definitely to disturb the peace. Before he was synonymous with the Avengers in Marvel, Loki was part of the Norse mythology, and he was a god that thrived on disruption. He engineered chaos among the gods, and many times this chaos led to him uncovering cracks among them. In West African Akan stories, Anansi manipulates both gods and humans. His victories come out of causing confusion, outsmarting people, and destabilizing expectations. In many Native American traditions, Coyote creates disorder that reshapes reality itself. Lessons are learned through embarrassment, loss, or reversal. In the Lakota culture, Iktomi is the bringer of the Lakota culture, but also the imp of mischief, whose delight is to make other people look ridiculous. The Celtic Fae were described in early Irish folklore as reactive and temperamental. They misled travelers, they created illusions, and they interfered with households that disrespected them. The goal isn't necessarily to harm, it's to cause confusion and disorientation, emotional agitation and fear, and to break trust that we humans have in our own senses. Many folklore suggests that certain entities are strengthened by this attention, especially when it's fearful or chaotic. In some interpretations of Fae lore, strong emotional reactions were believed to invite further interference. In various demonological traditions, agitation and discord were considered openings. And in modern paranormal theory, some researchers describe this as energy feeding, the idea that certain entities thrive on the emotional charge they generate: fear, frustration, arguments, and paranoia. So the trickster destabilizes, the destabilization creates emotional energy, and then the cycle repeats. So this comes to ask the question, are some entities intentionally manufacturing confusion because confusion sustains them? So when our keys suddenly disappear from the same spot they've always been, or we hear somebody whisper our name in the dark, is it an annoying ghost or is it an entity feeding off our energy? In this episode, I'm recounting true stories of people who encountered strange entities that seem to thrive off causing fear and confusion. In some of these stories, people categorize them as demons. In others, they outright call them trickster spirits. And in others, they're simply unsettling encounters that I would personally categorize as a trickster-type entity. I would love to hear what you think about these stories and how you would categorize these experiences, but I figured they'd fit well with a trickster-themed episode. Now, let's not waste any more time. So get comfortable, turn down the lights, and listen in. The Forest Encounter, submitted by user Kai Throwaway 1975. To this day, I don't know what it was exactly that I saw that night camping in the land between the lakes in western Kentucky. This happened a bit over 2 decades ago. My dad hunted, mainly bow hunting, regularly at the land between the lakes. And while I was never a hunter, I loved camping in the woods. We never used any formal campsite then. We drive along the trace, turn off onto one of the numerous side roads, and then, near a creek bed, usually dry or just a small trickle from a spring, we had our campsite. We pulled the car off the road, set up the tent, tarp it all over angled, and Dad would do his thing while I would do mine. Typically, if I went with him, that meant, and this time as well, he'd truck off to his stand and would be gone most of the day. While he was gone, I'd take a hike a bit, laying between the lakes. While big is not a place one could easily get lost if you have basic survival skills. I'd read or I'd just relax. For me, it was a place to go to get away from it all. Get lost in nature or in a good sci-fi book. This time, this early morning, my dad had left after a quick breakfast. A chill and dampness in the air, the smell of fall coming in. Any of the outdoor types will understand the smell of wet leaves during fall. I mention this only as it will be relevant later. Anyway, Dad had left, and I whittled some of the hickory staff I had made before heading out for a very early morning hike. I set off in the usual direction, opposite from the road we were nearby, mostly following near the creek, but not along it directly. I had a compass if I needed, but I never did. I had grown up in the Jackson Purchase, and it was home. I loved nature and never felt uncomfortable out in the woods. Before long, however, cresting a small hill, I heard rustling among the trees. While the leaves were starting to fall, most were still up, fall at its prettiest. I slowed only for a moment. I'm used to those sounds, squirrels typically bounding from tree to tree. But then it got louder, heavy, like any sound I'd ever heard trees make outside of them breaking under ice or age. It was hard to focus on the sound. Felt like it was coming from all around me, but not. And in every direction I turned, I saw trees in the distance, shaking, as if something large just jumped from them, but saw nothing else. Then, I was probably 15 years old, and despite years of being in the woods for many of them, I felt something I had never really felt before. Fear. Not terror, that would come later, but actual fear. Almost as soon as it had started, the rattling, violent shaking of trees focused, not in a ring around me, to one before me, opposite of the direction of camp, and then nothing. No sound at all, not quiet, but an absence, almost. Somehow that relaxed me. I had been exposed to that stillness before, and while the violent rustling of multiple trees felt alien, this was familiar. I thought about going back until I saw in the distance, near the last tree that shook, a slim, dark figure. I couldn't make her out. Somehow I felt it was a her, but she was up near the ridge ahead, and I felt compelled to head to her, and I did. I know that sounds crazy, and typing it now, I still do, but at the time, I rationalized it as, I wonder if she heard all of that too. Perhaps she saw what it was. But as I walked towards her, she slid away, staying just barely visible among the trees. The sky was just starting to really lighten up, the transition from dawn to morning. And slid was the right word, I feel. She moved what appeared to be normally, but the distance she seemed to cover was unnatural. I'm tall, at over 6 feet tall, but my strides covered half the distance hers did, and she seemed normal-sized. As normal-sized as a dark, featureless shape could be. I mean, I could see a head, arms, legs, and what appeared to be dark, but normal clothing. But I couldn't track her. Focusing on her was hard, and outside of knowing it was a her, I could tell nothing else as she disappeared and reappeared among the trees. A couple of 100 yards ahead of me, walking slowly yet somehow covering distance at running speeds. I could tell nothing else as she disappeared and reappeared among the trees, a couple 100 yards ahead of me, walking slowly yet somehow covering distances at running speeds. Again, I don't know why I followed her, but I did. Down a hill, through some fog, until I neared a clearing. I lost sight of her as I neared it, and things got darker, like when the sun crawls behind a dense cloud, except there were none that I could see. Though the sun was still too low for me to catch. The stillness was still there, but that didn't bother me. It was the smell that did. Every step closer to the clearing, I noticed it more and more, though I couldn't find her, and I desperately wanted to find her. Sent alarm bells through me. I've been both before and since in the woods hundreds of times. One thing I have never experienced since that weekend was the complete absence of smell. Nature has a smell, not a stink, but one that is distinct, one of decay and life, of plants and trees and creeks and stagnant ponds. And while depending on where you were at, you may not smell the same smells, it's always there. Except this time, there was nothing. That lack of smell slowed me down, stopped me. And only then did I see her. Across the clearing, looking at me. I wish I could say she was giant and hairy or alien gray, but she looked normal, indistinct and unmemorable, except for her smile. When she smiled, I ran. I had been scared before, with the trees out in the middle of LBL, but the lack of any smell, sound, and that smile, it terrified me, and I ran. I was crying and terrified, and I had no idea why I should be. I stopped about halfway back, and everything was brighter, and despite my terror, I still wanted to turn back. I did look back, and though she was just a shape again, she was there, closer, freezing as I spotted her. A smell again, but one I felt and did not see, and I ran, all the way back to the tent. I got in and cried, shaking in terror I did not and could not understand. I stayed in the tent until my dad got back, and I didn't tell him about it. By then, the terror had faded away, and while I couldn't explain it, I knew something horrible would have happened had I gone in the dark clearing that had no smells or sounds. By night, I had almost convinced myself I had half imagined it all, when, stepping away from the tent to pee, that stillness came over, and I froze. I looked among the trees, but saw nothing, until I saw two reddish lights moving in the distance. I knew the terrain and knew it had to be uphill for me, but the lights were descending. I felt her in the sense I had felt it was a woman earlier, coming my ways, and I felt a smell that was not a smell, even though I could not see it. I ran back to the tent, and my dad was there, staring into the fire, and when I yelled at him, he just sat there, not responding. I shook him, feeling those eyes, that her behind, and then, even the fire had no smell to it. It was just nothing. I shook my dad harder, screaming at him, and then suddenly, the fire was crackling. I could smell the smoke and the stillness was gone. My dad asked me what the hell I was yelling about, and when I told him, he gave me a look and a sideways glance and said, "Are you okay?" After much pressure, we left, and while I barely held it together, as soon as I got in my room at our house, I cried. Not because of embarrassment, but because of relief. I knew for a fact, had I not reached my dad, had I not shook him, that I would have wandered off in the dark. Just like I would have wandered off in the morning following her. She wanted me in that clearing, which felt wrong, smelled of nothing, and I wonder and have wondered for many nights what would have happened. I probably and hopefully will never have an answer. I just pray I never see or feel her again. I've been in the woods since then, both near there and other woods, and never have I felt that way again. But still, every time the woods get quiet, I get scared. There's a trickster spirit in my house. Submitted by user Anxious Alien the First. There's a trickster spirit in my house. I don't know when it came, but I do know that it's a little annoying. He likes to move your things when you're busy or not paying attention. For example, one time I was combing my hair in my room because my brother was using the bathroom. I realized I had forgotten something in there, so I placed my comb down on my makeup desk. When I came back, my comb was no longer there on the desk. It was sitting on the floor, in front of my closet. This has happened a couple of times with different objects. He mostly seems to hang out in my mom's room and be creepy. While my mom was away taking care of my terminally ill grandmother, who has since passed, my brother started using her bathroom to shower, because he likes to shower late at night while I'm asleep. He claims that one night, while he was in the shower, he heard footsteps outside the bathroom. As they got closer, he became more scared. And then they stopped, right outside the shower curtain. He thought it might be me, so he said, "I'm in the shower," but no one answered. He called out my name questioningly, but no one was there. After my grandmother passed, my mom came home. A few days later, she said she felt someone touching her back and hands. She believes it's my grandma's spirit because she had asked her to visit after she died. I don't think it's my grandma, though, because these things have been happening for years. I think this spirit is trying to pretend to be my grandma. For the past few years, my mom has heard knocking on her bedroom door. My dad has heard people talking in his room. My brother says he's seen strange things in his room, and I've seen things standing at the foot of my bed. Yes, I've considered the possibility of sleep paralysis, but most of this happens when we're wide awake, sometimes even in the middle of the day. It's annoying, if anything, and the fact that it might be trying to trick my family into thinking it's a deceased relative is what concerns me. Some people would say the behavior is demonic, but I honestly don't believe that for a second. I think it's a spirit that likes to have fun at others' expenses. And I guess I would too, if I were dead. The Puckwudgie, submitted by user Cottonmouth71. My grandfather had a very interesting story about the Puckwudgie. He was full-blood Muskogee Creek native. During the Depression era, the family horse farm in Oklahoma had gone under, and there was no work anywhere nearby. He and two of his brothers somehow found logging work in northern Minnesota, right on the Canadian border. All three of them made the trip, and upon arrival, they were instructed by my great-grandfather, their father, to make contact with the local native tribe, the Ojibwe. It was a different era at the time, and natives were treated poorly, looked down upon by most native folks. They did as instructed and made contact with the local Ojibwe tribe, who treated them with open arms and a sort of celebration. They were given advice by the elders on where to camp, and to not rile up any non-native loggers, and supplied them with some much-needed food, tools, etc. One of the main things the elders advised them on was to place some offerings of whiskey, tobacco, and fry bread on the perimeter of their camp, because it was known to be an area where the Puck lived or frequented. They established camp and did as advised by placing the offerings. Their first night, as they sat around the fire, one of my papa's brothers voiced his disbelief in such things as the Puck, and how he thought it was a waste of time leaving the offerings. The second night, my papa's older brother, the one who expressed his disbelief, had to do his business and set out to the edge of the camp to relieve himself. Within just a few minutes, he came running back into camp, obviously shaken. When Papa and the other brother asked what had happened, he wouldn't say. The next day at lunch, he finally broke down and told them what had happened. Just as he had dug a hole and settled into doing his business, he heard the sound of glass clinking and saw a little being with extreme features picking through the offerings they had placed and trying to open the pint of whiskey. When he saw this little guy, he gasped, and the being turned and looked at him, showing what he described as a pointy, toothy grin. He was frozen on the spot, literally being caught with his pants down. He further explained that when they saw each other, after the mischievous toothing grin, the Puck gathered up the stuff and took off running into the woods. The rest of their time at the camp, he diligently added to the offerings every chance he got. My papa said that in the later months, there were strange noises and even lights that they all saw and experienced. He also said that there were some unexplained deaths, strange accidents, and disappearances, and even reports of a couple of loggers that went crazy and had to be restrained and taken off the mountain. My papa told this story to all of us often, and when I got older, I asked him if it was just a tall tale, to which he replied in no uncertain terms that it was the absolute truth. Trickster. Submitted by Anonymous. I've seen ghosts since I was a kid, and I've had some pretty crazy experiences. Black shadow figures, demons, creatures, etc. I say that to say I've had a fairly active life. This experience, though, was different. It felt like something was attached to an object. My dad had purchased a second-hand item and placed it in the room next to mine on a Monday. I had no idea he'd bought anything or that anything in the house had changed. On Tuesday, I was sitting on my bed when I saw a woman with long black hair peeking out of that room, staring at me. There was no malice, just intense curiosity. She was light-skinned, almost gray, long, wet black hair, a soaked white dress, and barefoot. She looked like she had just been dragged out of a river. That's really all I recall, and that it was around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. Being used to seeing spirits, I told her to get out of the house and went about my day. The next day, I was in my workspace with my back to the door. I felt a woman walk into the room, so I turned to speak to my mom. But it wasn't her. It was the same spirit just standing there, staring at me like she wanted to talk. To be clear, I don't engage with them. I told her to get out, now, and started trying to figure out what was going on. The fact that she showed clear intelligence and took the initiative to come into my room immediately told me this thing was strong. And for some reason, it was in my house, not just something passing through. So I texted my dad and asked him if anything had changed. "Did you bring anything home?" He said yes. I asked him if he placed it in that room, and he told me he had, on Monday. He said, "Let's grab the items, and you can tell me if it's coming from one of them." The first item I grabbed felt fine. The second one, I immediately wanted to throw across the room. It felt like ants were crawling all over my hands. Apparently, my mom came into the room during that time and spoke to me, but I have no memory of that. All I could think of was, get rid of this thing, right now. It was fairly expensive, so I had to find somewhere to set it down gently. But trust me, I wanted to throw it out the window. I told my dad, it's definitely this one. Let's get it out of the house. I'm not comfortable with how comfortable this thing is walking around. As soon as he grabbed the item and put it in the garage, he started to feel super nauseous, dizzy, and a headache. He said, I feel like it's mad at me because I separated it from you. We basically wrote it off as another odd experience. That night, we watched a show in the living room and both fell asleep there. In my sleep, I saw her come into the room. She stood close to both of us, and she was absolutely furious. She looked the same, but instead of curious, it was pure anger and destruction. She appeared to be within this gray smear. I don't know how else to describe it, but like someone took a paintbrush with barely any dark gray paint and brushed it all over her. The next morning, I told my dad that thing needed to get out of the house entirely. He said he felt the impression of anger, but he couldn't see her. We decided to put it outside in the sun and see if that would purify it. We kept it outside for 2 weeks. It was primarily made of wood, which I now understand can hold energy. The first couple of times I handled it outside, the ants on my hands feeling hadn't diminished much. But the third time, I didn't feel it. I almost wanted to say the item was fine and could come back inside, but I had a word playing over and over in my head. Trickster, trickster, trickster. Again and again. I stopped touching it and left it there, more freaked out than before. I've always seen things, but hearing words repeated like that isn't common for me. At night, my dad and I would both feel it pacing outside the house, just absolute anger coming off of it. We could even identify the exact same panel of the French door it would be near. And there were probably 16 panels in that door. The last experience I had before we got rid of the item was I was standing in our doorway in our outdoor laundry room and felt like it rushed from behind. I immediately started to pray, and I heard it rush over the house with this boom whoosh sound, like when something breaks the sound barrier. After that, we got rid of the item. My questions are, what is a trickster? What did I encounter? And why was I hearing that word repeated? Trickster in the Kitchen, submitted by user Supernova. I was working in Indian gaming back of house, and within my first 2 weeks or so, I was told that the place is haunted, which I took to be a hazing. Little things like kitchen timers going off didn't strike me as odd considering the conditions of the kitchen I worked in. There were the baker's racks that moved around in the walk-in that you could attribute to uneven sheet metal flooring. The elevator that we used would halt mid-ride, but was never serviced in my time there. The dodgy power was because the generators were overloaded. These alone could be explained. What I still can't explain is the sheet tray that I saw fly off the shelf as my coworker passed by that hit her in the head. Or when another coworker fell and smacked her chin on the worktop and said it felt as though she was shoved. I saw that one too, and of course, no one was there. One day, I was taking a break in the corner of a kitchen, as we had no break room, when the tap to the hand-washing sink opened. My coworker Bobby asked me, "Hey, did you turn this on?" "No, I've been here the whole time," I said, not looking away from my copy of Silence of the Lambs. "Maybe it was the ghost," Bobby shrugged and kept on chopping salad toppings. "Well, if the ghost turned it on, then it can turn it off too. I'm on a break." I just said it to make Bobby laugh. By this time, most of the crew were miserable in our working conditions, and the unexplainable things didn't help. Actually, when the washers on a faucet break down, the pressure can build and open the tap. I'll report it, but we know they won't do anything. Bobby just shrugged it off, and I kept reading. Maybe 5 minutes went by when we heard the creak of the tap closing. Bobby's head snapped up and I whipped around and watched, slack-jawed, as the tap closed and the water was cut off. Bobby and I looked at each other for a moment and said nothing. Later that night, I was alone in the bakery. I started to close up and was washing my tools when a metal funnel flew off the shelf and landed in a wall sconce about 2 feet from my head, with enough force to break the bulb inside. I grabbed the funnel and smacked it back on the shelf it came from and said to the empty kitchen, "Stop it. I have to go and report this goddamn busted bulb, and I might be charged for it thanks to you. Do you think I like it here? Do you think I want to continue to work in this hellhole? I've got a problem. If you've got a problem with me, then show yourself and let's have a go. I'm sick of you messing with my timers, moving my tools, ramming me with racks in the walk-in, and flinging things at me. So come on and show yourself." I waited, but nothing happened. I left my kitchen to go down to the main kitchen and set up for the morning. When I returned some 10 minutes later, my long missing pocket knife that I had carried for years, and still had, was sitting, folded on the counter for me. Native American Spirit, or a Demon. Submitted by user LumpyCod6792. This story is my own personal experience that my wife and I experienced together. I'm sharing this story to gather some insight, and I figured this would be the perfect platform to get the story out. I have no reason to add any fabricated details to the story, so what I tell you is my exact recollection of what my wife and I witnessed. For some context, I have always been fascinated with the idea of the supernatural, but I've never been fully convinced. I've had a few weird experiences in the past, but never anything that solidified my belief. That was until this event took place. My wife is the type of person that doesn't give much thought into the subject. When I turn on Ghost Adventures or a paranormal show, she finds something else to occupy her time. Even though I didn't really believe, I just find the topic to be interesting. So with a little bit of context, I think it's a good place to start the story. It was the 4th of July, and we had made plans to join a large group of our friends at a lake house in Eufaula, Oklahoma. We all grew up in Oklahoma for the most part, and Lake Eufaula is a fairly popular place for people to travel to during the summer. I've been to this lake dozens of times growing up, so there wasn't an eerie feeling whatsoever. A pretty normal weekend. The house we stayed in was a large 2-story that was pretty old, but you could tell there were multiple additions that were made to the house. New garages, new bedrooms, new exterior porches. It was a nice house. The upstairs is where the majority of us slept. The layout of the upstairs was a large living room area, and there were 2 bedrooms up there, one on each side, and the living room area. My wife and I stayed in one bedroom, another couple stayed in the other bedroom, then 2 other couples slept on air mattresses out in the living room. Around 6 p.m. on the first night, a group of us decided to go out for a local bar down the road to have some drinks. My wife and a few other friends didn't feel like going, so they stayed back at the lake house. Our group stayed at the bar until about 10 p.m. I was a designated driver and chose not to have any drinks. This part is important to note. I was not impaired by any means. When we got back to the house, everyone there had been laying down for what seemed like a while. So I went to join my wife in bed. I opened the door to the bedroom, and it was pitch black. The only light visible was a charger block plugged into the wall that had a tiny blue light that was just bright enough so that I could see the shadow of the bed and my wife laying on it. So I crawled into bed and laid face to face with my wife. I told her I loved her and kissed her goodnight. She said it back, and then we laid silent for about 30 seconds to a minute. Mind you, I had only been in the bed for maybe a single minute at this point. I had closed my eyes for a mere moment. When I opened them, I saw what looked like the silhouette of my wife, like she had just sat up in bed. Again, it was pitch black and my eyes were still adjusting to make out the shape of her. So I sat and looked at what I thought was her shadow for about 20 to 30 seconds, trying to allow my eyes to adjust. Finally, I just asked her, "Hey, "What are you doing?" Thinking her voice would come from the direction of the shadow, but she responded with a simple, "What?" And her voice came from right in front of me, where she had been laying the whole time. Immediately, I froze. I couldn't take my eyes off of this shadow, and by the time my eyes adjusted, I knew it was something else, and I could start to make out a face, and it was moving closer. I sat and stared at this thing for what felt like eternity, with complete chills all over my body. I couldn't look away. By the time my wife responded again, "What, babe? Did you see something?" Instantly, I thought it was strange she would ask that, but I just tried to brush it off. The figure had vanished, and I couldn't tell if I was just seeing things. But in my head, I knew exactly what this thing looked like. And in the moment, I felt it best to keep this image to myself because of how terrifying it was. We tried to lay there for another minute. I didn't want to freak her out, so I just kept saying, "It's okay, let's go to bed. I just could be seeing things." While I knew 100% I wasn't just seeing things, and I was terrified. My wife felt the goosebumps on my body and instantly said, "I can't do this anymore. We're getting out of here." And she got up and scrambled out of the bedroom. I followed right behind her. We walked out to the living room area, and the two couples in there were half asleep. My wife, shaking at this point, starts saying, "Guys, Jax, me, just saw something in the room, and I need to tell you guys what I saw while you were at the bar." This is the part that completely sent me into a deep state of shock. From the time I saw it to the time she started telling me the story, I had not told her a single thing about what I saw. So buckled up because this scared the crap out of me. My wife had been laying down by herself in this room in the pitch black for about 2 hours while we were at the bar. She started telling us how she could see someone standing outside the door of the room from the crack under the door where the light seeped in. She didn't think much of it at first, so she shut her eyes to try to sleep. This part still gives me chills just typing it. But when she opened her eyes the first time, she saw a dark figure crawling on all fours from the door to the bed towards her. She said she was stuck, like in a paralysis, as this thing moved ever so slowly. Then she explains the face in full details. She said it was very tall, solid black, stick figure-looking creature with a large, solid black head that had this face, and I've seen it in my dreams since, and I'll never forget it. The face was very round with these bright orange bead-like eyes, with a massive smile from ear to ear, with very sharp, jagged teeth. When she said that, I almost fainted. She had explained exactly what I had just seen. I was in shock, and when she looked at me, she instantly knew that's exactly what I saw. I couldn't even speak because my brain could not rationalize how that could be possible. And as our friends were listening and asking her questions and the buzz of commotion was going on, everyone in the house heard what sounded like a coin falling and hitting the floor in our room. My brother, who was downstairs, heard us talking about it, and he heard the coin too. Just to note, the creature didn't make any noise and never said anything. It just stared and moved so slowly when it approached both of us. It had this smile like it was messing with us, but this thing was horrifying and not friendly looking whatsoever. It didn't attempt to do anything but look at us, so I can't explain its intentions at all. A couple of guys wanted to check out the room, so they went in there to find nothing on the floor. No coins, no small objects that could have made the sound. Nothing. It was spotless in there. They ended up bringing our mattress out in the living room area for us, and everyone slept in this small, confined area, all terrified at this point. Everyone ended up falling asleep after about 3 hours of talking about it and trying to rationalize what had happened and trying to debunk the situation, but we couldn't. The next morning, we woke up and told the rest of our friends who slept downstairs and didn't hear anything what happened the night before, the entire story. The friend who owns the house was pretty quick to share some extremely disturbing news with us. Although he had never any experiences like that, he said, "Well, have I showed you all the unmarked Native American graves in the backyard?" So he takes us back to look at this grave site in the backyard that was completely walled off with 7-foot center blocks walls on all 4 sides. There sat 3 or 4 unmarked headstones that looked like they were over 100 years old, just stuffed into this little section right next to the house. And this section was right below our bedroom window. So that concludes the story. We haven't been back there and don't plan on ever going back. But this is also about the most information we've gotten on what this creature was. I can't say what it was, and I can't prove it other than the fact that my wife explained the exact same thing I saw without ever hearing me described. We've talked about it a handful of times since, but I haven't been able to lay it to rest because I'm still stunned at what this could have been. I haven't had any real experiences at all, but I've seen it many times in my dream. The dreams don't ever feel too scary, and I think it's just my brain trying to remember it. And if you have any information on what this could have been, I'm open to discussion. And that's all for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. These were all kind of different, but I feel like they shared a similar thread. Disturbing occurrences of something that just seemed to want to mess with people, either by bringing in confusion or pure fear. If you have any thoughts to share, you can leave me a comment on Spotify or YouTube, or feel free to email me at chillersandthrillers@gmail.com. If you want to hear more true stories, don't forget I post 2 bonus episodes on the Patreon every month. Now, until next time, I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you soon.